Good morning. So thank you, Sir John, and I'm delighted to say a few words to the Midlands Forum for Growth. I'm sorry we're not in Cannes, but hopefully this will pick up into your living room in just as an exotic way as in the south of France. So my little talk is called Where Next for the West Midlands, and what we're going to do is have a look back at how we were doing pre-pandemic, because I'm a great believer that the history predicts the future, and that's actually encouraging for us. We'll look honestly at what's happened with the impact of COVID, and then we'll talk about where next. How are we going to bounce back? So we were going well. Things were good for the West Midlands. This map, which I love, it was in the Guardian newspaper. Of course, all Tory politicians love the Guardian newspaper, but we were okay with this one because it showed the relative growth of different parts of the country over the last few years, and it showed us and London leading the way. And as a consequence of that growth, this is what was happening to employment across the West Midlands, a really steady increase there through. So we were on a really good trajectory, a record employment rate as well as numbers in March of this year. And one of the things that was driving our economy was construction. It was actually the fastest growing sector, and within that, house building was doing really well, and we were nicely ahead of the target that we needed to get to the predicted number of homes by 2030. As you see there, almost a doubling of homes in the last 6 years. And we were also improving the skills of our workforce. Really important this, because I am so certain that this underpinned our recovery. Back in 2007, we were pretty much the worst qualified area of the country. And you see there on that graph, the steady improvement in the proportion of our workforce qualified up to NVQ level 3. We, of course, were investing in infrastructure across the region, all sorts of examples, but this perhaps the most visual, the old meets the new at the Town Hall and Metro extension in Birmingham city centre. And we were setting out our stall and really getting behind the long-term challenge of zero carbon emissions by net zero carbon emissions by 2041 under the hashtag WM2041. We'd come together, said what we were going to do, getting our plan in place. And we had, just before the pandemic, probably the biggest regional win of all announced with the confirmation that HS2 would go ahead. Here, the Prime Minister meeting apprentices down at Curzon Street in Birmingham city centre in February. And of course, we were also full steam ahead for planning for these major events, and they were injecting expenditure into our economy as well, whether capital expenditure in the building or, of course, the spending of tourists as will come. So much was looking good. We were getting behind them with this big tourism, trade and investment programme. We secured this in the budget just before the pandemic, the budget of March, new funding to get behind the trade, tourism and investment opportunities. And of course, we were really making the most of our 5G opportunity. I always show the Rico for this because the wonderful Vodafone 5G lounge there, but it was beginning to be applied with businesses. So lots of what we had won in the previous few years was coming good and giving us real momentum. And of course, that was noticed by people. They were voting with their feet, or more precisely, Londoners were voting with their feet. This graph, which goes to June 19, shows where young Londoners were migrating to. Mix of job opportunities, quality of life, quality of housing, and you could see that we were leading the way. So many people talked at the turn of the decade of 2020s being the West Midlands decade. A nice position that we were in. Not that everything was right, still challenges, but overall we were telling a good story. But that's been knocked incredibly hard by COVID-19, hasn't it? And nobody saw the economic crisis coming on the back of the health crisis. This simple graph shows the fall in economic activity across different sectors: construction, services and manufacturing. Construction the worst, manufacturing next, services a little bit more resilient, but the total an incredible 20% reduction in GDP in that April period. And then you see the recovery, that graph just up to August, but we know, of course, that recovery has sustained, even if more slowly, into October. And we know that regionally, our economy was particularly vulnerable. 3 sectors where we're very strong that actually took a real hit, or we thought they were going to take a real hit. Manufacturing, we've already seen the number there. That definitely took a hit, but has bounced back. Then, of course, business tourism, the image at the bottom right of one of the many exhibitions or conferences that we host here. Real leadership in this sector, and that's been pretty much closed. And then the higher education sector, particularly in Coventry and Birmingham, huge contributor to our economic success. And that too, very challenged. So all the forecasts were that we were particularly vulnerable. In terms of the data, it's not yet clear whether that prediction is actually coming to pass. The optimists might say no evidence of us being more vulnerable than others as of yet, but far too soon to conclude that question. What is sure is there are some really challenging times ahead for our city centres, whether it be Coventry, Birmingham or Wolverhampton, and really hard, the shortfall of business customers in the city centres. And of course, there's lingering uncertainty. This is really affecting confidence about future lockdowns. What are we going to come out to? Will there be further lockdowns in the future? And you see that business confidence index just wobbling again in October and November. But there is a glimmer of hope, of course, on the horizon now, whether it be Pfizer or indeed, as they say, there are other vaccines likely to be available. And certainly by the middle of next year, the hope is of some return to more normal conditions. But no question, it's knocked us very, very hard. So where next? How are we going to bounce back? That's the question. Now, what I want to put to you is that some of the strengths that we had before COVID will see us through, because it's the underlying fundamental parts of the economy that I think can lead us to be relatively confident if we exploit them best. And of course, the first thing is our connectedness. Both within the region, we know that more productive regions are better connected locally. And of course, between us and other areas, so the big HS2 investment and the digital connectedness, oh so important. What have we learned? Everything's digitized. That 5G win seems even more important, and making the most of that is critical. Then underlying everything is, of course, our workforce of the future. The youth and diversity of our population. This is the Young Combined Authority representative of the region, and it gives me huge confidence to think of the quality of our workforce coming through, the innovativeness of it, the sort of literally the diversity of thought, which is a huge advantage to any business. That combined, of course, with our top class academic institutions. Of course, we know of their strength historically, but these will be even more important as we plan the businesses of the future. And we know that we've got a very strong entrepreneurial spirit here, this wonderful ranking of our locations that you see there from the Times this time last year. And of course, some of our big assets taking a knock at the moment, the NEC Group, Birmingham Airport, but of course, some are really coming through incredibly well. The MTC thinking again about new techniques there and the wonderful work on apprentices. So these assets will come back and will steer us through our piece. And of course, we do have a clear plan, absolutely critical. And that plan, the local industrial strategy, will be 18 months old by now, but I am still certain that the notion of concentrating where we've got an international advantage is right. So we're in a great place with that thinking. And some of the sectors, look at the very first one, low carbon technology, clean growth, so important. But we've got some additional challenges, let's be honest. Getting ready for Brexit, us being the exporting capital of the UK, there is still clearly a challenge over the free trade deal. And I so want our government to deliver that with, of course, this important issue about the rules of origin being respected as well, particularly for our manufacturers. And then we've got to navigate everything against a really difficult public sector debt background. So the government probably aren't going to be able to continue to invest as they have over the last 6 months. Over 2 trillion, the national debt now. Now I know interest rates are low. I know we've got to do the right things in the short term. But as we all know, this is a challenge. So as we navigate the recovery, this is obviously bearing down upon us as well. But at the same time, we've got redundancies at record levels. So whether it be redundancies, claimant count, unemployment coming through a bit of a lag, particularly with furlough, but we see the enormous challenge we've got, and particularly for young people and those in disadvantaged communities. This always falls harsher on these who are least resilient. So an enormous challenge there. So how we address this when the public finances are at such a challenging point does, of course, call for incredible ingenuity. But against all that background, we've been busy planning for our recovery. Some things we can do ourselves, but some things we need government support, and that's why we put this 3.2 billion recovery package into government that we called Recharge. It's all about shovel ready. It's all about repositioning for the future. And of course, it's about building on our strengths in a unique way with a real focus on jobs and training, getting people back to work. And we've had some early successes from that. The Urban Transformation Fund carrying on a brownfield development. Here we see the wonderful image of Port Loop in Birmingham, a scheme that's midway through its redevelopment. And there will be more, and driving that house building sector, such a quick and immediate multiplier effect in our economy. We've had one or two really eye-catching successes as well. Funding to build out the National Brownfield Institute in Wolverhampton to be the sort of brains behind this brownfield redevelopment. Improving the connectedness of a critical area of South Birmingham University Station, West Midlands Combined Authority, getting this scheme underway in the teeth of the pandemic. And of course, again, thinking about innovation. Here, the Light Rail Innovation Centre to be built in Dudley for prototyping and then piloting the vehicles on the streets of Coventry. And we've had an incredible vote of confidence as well, reminding us that the private sector will invest our way out of this challenge. The vote of confidence in the Health Innovation Campus in South Birmingham at Selly-Oak, the university, the hospital, and of course the brilliant investment from Bruntwood and L&G, giving us real strength to this part of our industrial strategy. And there's so much more to fight for, and it will be a fight, but we've got to go into it really confident. The image here of the Tesla Gigafactory in Nevada, I think it is, in the States. Now, we don't have a landscape quite like that, but we are going to need to compete in this electrification of the automotive sector and then moving to other sectors as well with said Gigafactory. And I am optimistic the government will put the money on the table for us to be able to bring this to the West Midlands in the not too distant future, a critical part of our new industry. So we've got lots of strengths. But the thing that will really see us forward is if this spirit of innovation that has obviously characterised this region before, of course, the three heroes of the first industrial revolution there, thinking now about the green recovery. We've got all the ingredients, we can be optimistic, but it's going to take incredible business and public sector leadership to find our way through to another leadership position. Thanks a lot for your part in what we're going to do.